Let's get on the phone lines now and speak to the Director of Communications Officer for the NDC, Sammy Gyamfi. Mr. Gyamfi, thank you for your time this afternoon. Hello, Mr. Gyamfi. I believe that you do hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much for your time. Now, I believe you've seen this, the latest result of the CPI. What do you make of it?
Yes, we have taken notice of the latest CPI and the fact that Ghana has dropped 2 places, as compared to our performance last year. Clearly, this is yet another dent on Ghana's reputation and a reflection of the endemic corruption that has engulfed the Akufo-Addo government since its inception in 2017. This is a man who was elected on the back of an anti-corruption campaign, having trumpeted his vainglorious anti-corruption credentials to Ghanaians. And so Ghanaians expected more from him relative to the fight against corruption. But it is obvious from his performance relative to the CPI of Transparency International so far that his so-called fight against corruption is a monumental failure.
So
the people of this country have lost trust in his will and commitment to the fight against corruption, and that is what is reflecting in these, in the poor scores that his government has scored since 2017.
Okay, so if you're talking, thanks for that preliminary comments you make there, but if you're talking about the results and what it shows of this country, generally, if you say we've dropped 2 places, yes, we have dropped 2 places, but that's in the ranking because there's a difference between the ranking and the score. If you look at the score, we still maintained what we had in 2008.
And the score, if you go to school, my sister, and you score an F, and say in year 1, and you repeat that same score in year 2, it doesn't mean that you have done well because you repeated your score in year 1. Because that repeated score is an abysmal score. President Mahama, the predecessor of President Akufo-Addo, who he, lambasted when in opposition, achieved the highest ever score ever to be recorded by this country relative to the CPI in 2014, a score of 48. That is Ghana's best ever score. President Mahama's worst ever score under the CPI was what was recorded in 2016, a score of 43%. And given the promises President Akufo-Addo made in opposition, the talk about incorruptibility, the fact that he was going to ruthlessly deal with, corruption in his government and protect the public purse, Ghanaians expected him to do better. But so far we know that his best ever score is a score of 41. In 2017, he scored 40. 2018, 41. And 2019, he has repeated that by scoring another 41. That score of 41 is still worse than the worst ever score of John Dramani Mahama, which is a score of 43. And so this is not the change Ghanaians were promised. This is not the change Ghanaians, voted for. It is a clear betrayal of trust. But you see, in as much as this latest EPI has, put Ghana on the global map for the wrong reason, it comes as no surprise to us in the NDC. Because like I said, it reflects the endemic corruption that has engulfed this government, which we are already aware of. Since President Akufo-Addo took office, he has continuously endorsed, whitewashed, and promoted corrupt officials of his. He's turned himself into a chief corruption clearing agent who, instead of punishing those who engage in corruption, comes out to boldly defend them. And that is what has emboldened his appointees to entrench themselves in corruption, a situation that has even elicited the condemnation of the diplomatic community in Ghana.
Well,
you see, so we are earning a very bad reputation in corruption under President Akufo-Addo. And mind you, this also goes to confirm the recently released findings of CDD relative to the 8th Afrobarometer survey report that 53% of Ghanaians think that the canker of corruption has worsened under President Akufo-Addo. So clearly, all these rankings, all these surveys are beginning to show a certain worrying trend. And that trend has to do with the loss of public confidence in the so-called fight against corruption.
Let's try and put Ghana's score within a particular context here. And I can understand how you would compare the performance of President Akufo-Addo to former President John Mahama. Of course, I can understand that. But let's put it in the, let's look at the bigger picture. If you look at countries like Seychelles, countries like Botswana, these are African countries. They're scoring as high as 66. Shouldn't we compare ourselves with the best practices rather than compare the West of the West? Or the best of the West, I should say. Hello, Mr. Gyamfi.
Was voted out partly on the basis of.
The beginning of that. Can you start?
Hello?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm saying that President Akufo-Addo has a social contract with the people of the country. That social contract, you know, is based on the promises he gave the electorate in the run-up to the 2016 election, that he was going to do better than the Mahama administration was doing in the fight against corruption. And so if the worst ever score of the Mahama administration is a score of 43, and his best score in the last 3 years so far is a score of 41, he must bow his head down in shame. It means that he has failed. I don't care about what the performance of other countries, because on that same, you know, CPI index which has just been published, you would realize that we have fallen behind countries such as Benin, Senegal, Rwanda, and so on in the fight against corruption. You see, so we are not doing well. We have not seen any improvement in the fight against corruption in the last 3 years. That, for me, is what is critical for the people of this country. From the Bosgate scandal, in which 5 million liters of contaminated fuel was stored under dubious circumstances, to the cash for sea scandal, to the Galamsey fraud scandal, to the Australian vessel fraud scandal, and all the many other scandals we have seen, the countless of scandals. The list is endless. The recent case of the missing 400 tricycles in the northern part of the country and all that. You're unable to achieve the needed deterrent, you know, for the fight.
One of the concerns, Mr. Gyamfi,
corruption is thriving under him.
One of the concerns being raised.
Until President Akufo-Addo understands, my sister, before you come in, that charity begins from home, you know, and begins to act decisively by punishing his own officials who are plundering the state coffers. Corruption will continue to sink very deep in his government, like we are witnessing on all fronts.
So I wanted to come in there because I wanted to, you know, highlight this. One of the things that the GIF, for example, has said is that depending on the way you look at these scores, you might end up running down your country, a country that's hopeful of foreign investors, and that these things don't do well for us. We know that there is a political bit of it, but in the long run, it doesn't do very well for us as a country that's seeking.
What exactly are you referring to?
That's seeking foreign investors. Now, if you look at the score of 41, we haven't gone up, but we haven't gone down either. Wouldn't you rather trump the positives?
So now the suggestion is being made that we Ghanaians are stopped from demanding higher standards from our government. We are stopped from holding the president and his appointees accountable to their promise. Is that what they are suggesting? Somebody was fighting corruption and was scoring as much as 48. You were in opposition at the time, and you said that person was so corrupt that he needed to be voted out. Ghanaians listened to you and voted out the person and brought you in. Since you came in, your best ever score is worse than the worst ever score of that person. And you want the opposition to shut up about this. You want the opposition not to talk about this. In any case, we are not the only ones complaining about alarming levels of corruption in the Akufo-Addo government. even the diplomatic community. Were you not in this country when the Australian ambassador, the U.S. ambassador, and several other, diplomats at a function in this country complained about increasing levels of corruption, which is affecting the investments of their citizens in this country. So I think that the right counsel should be directed to the Akufo-Addo government, to sit up and to take the fight against corruption more seriously than they have done in the last 3 years. Let us begin to see prosecution. Let us begin to see corrupt officials being punished. I don't care whether, those culpable are either NDC or MPP. Corruption has no political color. You promise to fight against corruption, and that is what you must do. You understand? But you have a president who is always defending errant appointees of his. He always comes out clearing corrupt officials of his government. What has happened to the perpetrators of the Australian Visa Fraud scandal? The man who was the chairman of that committee has today been given another appointment as Deputy Minister of Information, Honorable Payo Sajide. What has happened to the perpetrators of the Galamsey fraud scam?
Well, as far as the government is concerned, Mr. Gyamfi, the government has said that there was an investigation and he was cleared of it. But I mean, we can go.
Have you cited a copy of that investigative report?
Let me just refocus our conversation.
No,
now
there is no need for you to refocus the conversation.
I'm refocusing the conversation because I want us to go a bit more deeper into. Mr. Gyamfi, if you allow me, if you allow me.
We cannot have this discussion without looking at some specifics.
No problem at all. You've mentioned that already. Granted. I want us to look at the Ghana Integrity Initiative statement in which they talk about certain things that government should do on the back of these calls from the Transparency International. It talks about, government looking at critical elements to promote public sector to remove public sector corruption, etc. But there's also a part for political parties, and that's where I'm bringing you to. It says the political parties must demonstrate a high sense of integrity and transparency in all their campaign finances to avoid the snares of political, in quote, political entrepreneurs. To what extent is the NDC living up to this particular part of the statement?
My sister, all these theoretical suggestions for me are completely irrelevant to the issue of the alarming levels of corruption under the Akufo-Addo government. I don't see, because you see, you must understand that we have vested the authority of government in one person, the executive president of state. The prosecutorial powers of state is vested in the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, who is appointed by the president and answerable to the president. So the ultimate responsibility to investigate cases of corruption, whether it involves political parties or public sector players or whatever, persons or authorities, is that of the president, who has been elected by the people. We have a president who gave us a lot of promises relative to the fight against corruption. What we must do as citizens and not spectators, what the media, which is the fourth, who are the fourth estate of the realm, must be doing is to be holding the president and his officials accountable.
Mr. Gyamfi, you've not really answered my question. You've not really answered my question, and unfortunately I'm running out of time. So if you could answer the question.
No, I have answered your question. I'm telling you that what you are asking me is completely irrelevant. What is important for me?
Why do you think it is irrelevant?
I'm saying that the buck stops with the president. I mean,
the buck stops with the president. I mean, I get that, but bits of the argument you've made that already. What I'm asking is that the Ghana Integrity Initiative lists a couple of things that government must do. I'm not quoting the part of the government to you because obviously you're not in government, but I'm quoting the part of the political parties, and your political party is a key political party in this 2020 election. So I'm asking you whether or not the extent to which the NDC as a political party is going to subject itself to this part of the recommendations.
My sister, do we have a choice to decide whether or not we will subject ourselves to the laws of this country? We don't have a choice.
It's up to you to open up so that the finances now the next one. So let me read to you the next one.
We don't have any option relative to that. It is a matter of law.
Very well.
So it is for our law enforcement agencies to do their work. And these law enforcement agencies are answerable to the president, who has the mandate of the people. And so let's not, shift the goalpost.
All right. So let me bring you to the fourth point. The fourth point says that the Electoral Commission should enforce sections 13 and 14 of the Political Parties Act 2000, Act 574, which deals with declaration of asset and expenditure by political parties. The Electoral Commission is obviously an independent institution.
Yes. So like I said, law enforcement agencies, in this case, the Electoral Commission of Ghana, do their work. That is all.
Have you made your finances?
If political parties fail to comply with the political parties' law, they are laid down sanctions, they are laid down procedures, for enforcing the law. The Electoral Commission knows that. The Attorney General and Minister of Justice, who has been appointed by the President, knows that. So for me, that is neither here nor there. In any case, I mean, what is the contribution of political parties to the poor performance of Ghana in the last 3 years relative to the CPI? What have we contributed? Can you mention any corruption scandal that political parties like the NDC, the PNC, the CPP, who are in opposition, have contributed to? All the corruption scandals which have led to this poor showing in the CPI are scandals involving officials of the Akufo-Addo government.
Has the NDC as a political party, as a major political party going into the 2020 elections, declared its asset or expenditure to the Electoral Commission?
I don't have information. I would think that has been done. I need to speak to our Treasurer and our General Secretary before I can give you specifics on that. But as for me, that is totally irrelevant to the issue at stake. Yeah, and I think I've already explained that.
I'm sure that our viewers will not agree with you, but that's okay. That's totally up to them. But then we understand that the NDC...
Because we are not entrusted with public funds. Nobody pays taxes to an opposition party. And so I don't know why that should even be an issue.
Well, the law, it's here in the law. It's quoted here that there's an
but
act...
it is not for us to enforce the law.
Fair enough.
It is for the Electoral Commission to enforce the law.
Fair enough. The question I asked was whether or not...
Agencies.
I understand that, Mr. Sammy Gyamfi. The question I asked was whether or not the NDC, I mean, being I believe a law-abiding party, will do this even without the intervention of the
last time I checked, we're not in default relative to the declaration of our assets and the filing of our public our financial accounts and so on. We're not in default, and I'm not sure. I mean, anybody has suggested, or the Electoral Commission has suggested, that the NDC has not been complying with that requirement of law.
Your final comments, Mr. Gyamfi.
My final comment is that until President Akufo-Addo steps up and begins to punish his own officials who are engaging in acts of corruption, corruption will continue to thrive. The only way Ghana can succeed in the fight against corruption is when credible, transparent investigations are conducted into corruption scandals, and those found culpable are punished. That is what he has failed to do, and that for us is a betrayal of the trust of Ghanaians, for which reason he will be rejected in the upcoming December 2020 votes.
Mr. Gyamfi, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Sammy Gyamfi is Communications Officer for the opposition NDC there.